Intelligence to acquire this little company that Davidson was looking at.
Our interest in buying them came because we had achieved a larger and larger market share of the educational software market, and a larger business, much larger, was the entertainment side of PC software.
One night, Bob just said to Alan, he goes, "How much do you want?" And Alan gave him an astronomical amount, and thinking that Bob would just go, "No way, that's way too much." And Bob said yes.
We were a public company at the time, I believe, and so we had the wherewithal to do that. But we didn't know if they had an interest in selling, but I guess Interplay made them an offer or approached them about acquiring more of them.
Interplay back in those days was the cream of the crop. They were an excellent company and had a lot of really, really good people.
We always thought, well, Interplay had a bit of an advantage because they were culturally aligned with the folks at Silicon and Synapse. On the other hand, we were adults. And one of the things they were looking for was adults to do the business side of the business.
They basically said, nothing has to change. You guys continue doing just what you're doing now. You guys are really good at making games. We're really good at educational software. We'll handle the sales and distribution for you, but nothing has to change. Keep doing what you're doing.
These guys are creative, and you can't control, creative talent. You've got to let it do what it's going to do. And I said, they're more than creative. They understand they're consumers. They are their consumers. Finally, on a Friday, Alan called me and said, your company's really very attractive, but, we've been doing business with Interplay for quite a while, and we think we're going to go that direction. And Jan came in my office a little while later, and I said, well, the guys down at Silicon and Synapse have decided to go to Interplay. She said, really, can I talk to Alan? I said, be my guest. And she did. So I'll let her describe that conversation.
Well, I called him up and I said, you have made a big mistake. And he said, well, we've been sitting on the floor and we were thinking that we may have done the worst thing we've ever done to ourselves. And I said, you've made a big mistake and I want you to think about it some more.
The following Monday, Alan called me and he said, I've been thinking about what Jan has said all weekend and I didn't get a minute's sleep. And I'm thinking, that's pretty good. And so finally said, we really want adults, we really want the business acumen that we see with the folks at Davidson. He said, we're going to change our mind, we'll go with you.
They said that we would be able to completely retain our creative control over the games we were making, and that has managed to allow us to protect our autonomy all of these years. And I think we've got a setup that is totally unique in terms of divisions of larger organizations having this type of autonomy.
It wasn't hard for us to allow Blizzard to do its thing, but there was always a little caveat. As long as it was working, if it's not working, we may have to do something, but it always worked. There wasn't a time when it didn't work.
Well, I think any name change for our company was destined to be better than Silicon and Synapse.
At some point, Alan decided we need to change our name. So there was this sort of brainstorming effort, and we wound up with Chaos Studios,
which we felt was pretty representative of our development process, which I'm told is still pretty representative of our development process.
A lot of people thought it said Chows or Chads.
And then we got a phone call from a company called Chaos Technologies. They're based out in Florida, and they basically said, hey, we have the name Chaos, but we're happy to let you continue using it, but it will cost you $100,000. And we said, ooh, okay, no thanks, we'll pick a different name.
One of the first things that happened after the acquisition was Alan calls and said, well, we had a big meeting and we don't like the name Chaos anymore. We want to change it.
So we were going through some other ideas, and then we had an idea for Ogre Studios.
Well, at the time, we were already part of Davidson and Associates, and when Alan presented the new name Ogre Studios to Jan Davidson, she hated it.
I said, oh, that's interesting. Can I get back to you on that? So I had a little chat with Jan, and she had kind of an initial, thump.
Thought that the name might be a little scary for the kids.
I called Alan back, and I said, I did promise you that you'd have your own independence, and this is kind of embarrassing, but this does seem to have some impact, according to Jan and our marketing folks, and they know better than I, on our business.
So we ended up changing that name as well to something a little bit more friendly. And I think the way we figured it out was Alan came in one weekend with 7 words he picked out of the dictionary.
Midnight Studios was one, which sort of sounds like a porn company maybe, and Blizzard Entertainment, which came up clean, and thankfully we navigated all of those mediocre and sometimes bad names and wound up with a really awesome name like Blizzard.
We went from boobies to ogres to chads to Blizzard. I remember, this was hundreds of years ago, a chap by the name of Chris Metzen came in, and he walked into my office. Alan was showing him around, and he noticed that I had a lot of D&D stuff on the walls, and so he and I were immediately connected there, geeks.
I was playing with a band many years ago, and at one of the gigs we were doing, I guess I was drawing on a cocktail napkin or something. A friend of a friend came by and saw it, and said, hey, there's this place down in Costa Mesa hiring for artists. And I didn't really know what the place was. I thought it was like some kind of graphic arts firm. But at the time, I figured, hey, if they're going to pay me to draw, that sounds pretty good. And I rolled down on a Friday morning and met a very charming man called Joey Ray. I think his first words out of his mouth were, what the hell do you want?
Some of the times we weren't exactly the most pleasant people to be talking to. We would answer phones like, what? And Alan would come out and yell at us and say, you can't answer the phone that way, guys. I'm like, okay, fine,
And I put, some of my drawings down on the desk, and he went and got the boss, a guy named Alan Adham, and he invited me back. We talked for a little bit, and he asked me if I wanted a job, and I told him that I would sweep his floors. I just knew that the place I'd walked into and all the people that I met that day, like that was, it was home.
It was basically, back in the day, a lot of geeks playing a lot of different games and listening to heavy metal and rock and roll and all that.
There were a lot of shenanigans. A bunch of yahoos running around, running around with Nerf guns. And
nobody knows how the Jawa Wall came to be.
One day, someone got a hold of like a little yellow block of Post-it notes. And I don't remember who drew it first, but drew like a Jawa. Like, haha, it's funny, Jawa.
People started screwing with the integrity of the Jawa name.
All these artists are drawn, we had one that was, had this particularly big afro and these big glasses, and he was just, very, very angry flipping the bird, and that was Jawa Ray Hall, right? That was pretty funny.
And mixing it up with classic heroes like Jawa and Wayne.
Joe Optimus Prime, a big Jawa chasing a Jeep. That was, Jurassic Park.
From Samurai Showdown, Jawan Fu.
Like a guitarist smashing a Jawa with his foot, which was the Jawa pedal.
The whole wall was filled with it, and then days later, it was gone. It was like a shadow of a memory. And I still look back to those days with longing. But alas, they are no more. Thanks, HR. We had been making a lot of games for the console and everything, we had kind of pushed to be a little bit more thicker and chunkier.
The first thing I worked on for Blizzard was Justice League Task Force. It was like a Street Fighter type game we were doing with superheroes, which just lit me up like a Christmas tree.
This game was special because we learned a very valuable lesson in this, that Superman, no matter what you've seen, cannot kick.
I moved on. I think they tried me out on tile sets for Lost Vikings 2.
I started with Blizzard in '94, and I was quickly put into a bullpen with Mickey Nielsen, Dave Bergeron, Chris Metzen. Didn't really know Metzen at the time. I remember we were all just starting to learn 3D, and it was a pain in the butt because we'd all come from a very traditional background, artistic background.
All the artists were transitioning over to 3D Max. The whole industry's going 3D. I remember being very intimidated by the program. So I'm like, oh no, like I hope I can keep this job. I don't think I'm gonna be able to do this.
I remember Chris cussing. I'm like, oh, that guy's cussing. I'm like, I don't know if they allow that in the workplace. And I remember just hearing him pull back and just...
I wound up, I think, spitting on my screen in frustration.
I look over, I'm like, dude, that guy's getting fired. And I remember for like the next week, every time I'd come in, I'm like, how is he still here? How did that guy not get fired?
In those days, we wore a lot of hats. Everyone wore a lot of hats.
You had your set job, like in my case, it was doing art or stuff like that, but I also was a receptionist. We also did all QA ourselves. We also did all tech support ourselves.
I was one of 2 people that was in charge of tech support. So we would basically take telephone calls during the day, tech support calls during the day. And then in the evening, we'd go to Fry's or Micro Center or whatever and pick up hardware to come install on people's computers. So we did a lot of stuff.
Any time that you could do more than one thing, it was always appreciated, and we always just jumped in. That's the way we were.
We would have artists working on Death and Return of Superman one day, then working on Justice League Task Force the next day, and then starting up this new little game, I don't know, what is it called? Warcraft.
At the time, a lot of us really liked Dune 2, the game from Westwood Studios.
But we were the first company, apart from Westwood, to recognize the value of the RTS genre.
The evolution of the Warcraft universe is probably a very awkward process. Most of its ideas were just this kind of amalgamation of the different designers and people working on it at the time. It was pretty classic stuff, pretty classic fantasy stuff.
So we were making characters, orcs and humans and all this sort of thing, but they just looked kind of small and realistic and kind of doink. One of the reasons was because they were small and doink.
Sam Didier and certain of the other lead artists kind of got involved. The idea of creating kind of these interlocked ideas or cultures really allowed these guys to have a springboard into the art design process.
That was our attempt at doing something that was a little bit more fun and fast and fantasy, but not boring medieval fantasy with little doinky swords and guys with little chainmail hoods. Nah, we had cool stuff like orcs with horns coming out of the sides of their helmet and all kinds of teeth and dwarves and all that.
Warcraft 1 was such a hit that Blizzard really became a known developer. Everybody in the industry went, wow, it became Game of the Year, and that raised a lot of eyebrows. And the second year, they weren't any longer the new kid on the block.
Around the time that we started jamming Warcraft 2, I remember feeling very intensely that, like, wouldn't it be fun to blow this thing out, really, to have multiple kingdoms and continents and, more races involved, each with their own kind of distinct flavor and history. Ultimately, there were many years between, Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 3. We had cut our teeth on a few other, game types or universes that allowed us to grow and really get our, storytelling values in line. So by the time Warcraft 3 really came about, we were ready to attack that thing. We knew who we were as artists. We knew who we were as storytellers. And the ideas came much freer and much clearer. And it definitely had heart.
The cinematics were fantastic. I, in some ways, still feel like those cinematics were the high watermark for the industry. And I think it'll just continue. I think, we see over the next 10 or 20 years as the sort of artistic ceiling on what we can do real time continues to rise.
It was also a very important project for me because I wanted to really define the art style for Blizzard. It was probably one of the first times that me and Metzen really focused very closely together on the storytelling. I'd set the bar pretty high in my mind, and to achieve that, it took a lot of late nights.
Cinematics department actually, I guess the seeds of that started way back during the development of Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans. I think we had one person in the cinematics department. That was Joey Ray Hall.
I was the original cinematics person at all in Blizzard Entertainment because I had 3D experience.
He created these sort of, by today's standards, very rudimentary looking 3D zoom-ins on the map.
By War II, we had started building up a lot more 3D stuff and bringing in more people.
Before I started at Blizzard, I was going pre-med, and a buddy of mine was working at Blizzard and kept telling me, you got to check this thing out. And I remember walking into the office on Red Hill and thinking, okay, this is home. This is the coolest place ever. Why would I ever leave? Cinematics department was created round about the time of Diablo 1. We set out to basically prove ourselves. We did the intro to Diablo 1. And at the time, it was pretty cool. I look back on it now and cringe, but I guess it was pretty cool.
Hello, my friend. Stay a while and listen.
The idea for Diablo really came from the guys over at Condor, which eventually became Blizzard North.
They were a solid team, young like us, very good.
Originally, Diablo was going to be a turn-based claymation role-playing game.
And we said, well, we think the core of the idea is excellent, but let us show you what we're doing with 3D these days. And so we kind of redirected them from claymation to 3D. Let's try to imagine what Diablo would have looked like if it were done with claymation.
Diablo seemed a little dark. to me. But by that time, I was not going to question the Blizzard. I mean, we'd already had